Last night, the Australian government made a very important decision to help Qantas secure Australian jobs now and into the future. Right now, the Qantas Sale Act is imposing restrictions on Qantas which are not imposed on their competitors, which make it harder for Qantas to compete in what is a very competitive market. Removing Part 3 of the Qantas Sale Act will help level the playing field, will help Qantas compete on a more level playing field with other players in the market. Beyond that, of course, there is still the opportunity for the Parliament, there is still the opportunity for the Australian Labor Party to help take burdens off Qantas and off other players and businesses in the aviation industry by supporting our legislation to scrap the carbon tax. The filibuster in the Senate, the carbon tax filibuster in the Senate has been going on for too long. There is a real opportunity for Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, if they genuinely care about jobs in Australia, about stronger growth in Australia, to support our plans to scrap the carbon tax. Scrapping the carbon tax will bring down the cost of doing business, which will help create jobs sustainably into the future. Happy to take questions.
The government's been saying it hopes Labor gets on board with these changes, but Qantas itself has said it's disappointing the action you've taken. That's hardly a ringing endorsement.
Well, Qantas was asking the government to play favourites. Qantas is engaged in a competitive battle with Virgin. May I add that the competition between Qantas and Virgin is delivering benefits for people across Australia. It is driving improvements in service delivery. It is helping to bring prices down. But of course, we do recognise that Qantas is facing restrictions through the Qantas Sale Act, which are making it harder for them to compete, which is why the best thing the Australian Parliament can do is to unshackle Qantas, to free Qantas, to engage in that competition on a level playing field. That is what the Australian government is putting forward.
Qantas argued, though, that essentially Virgin's had a head start on that foreign capital. So could you have looked at some sort of temporary leg up in terms of loan guarantee, a couple of years only, to let even things up in the true sense?
Well, that is why it is so important for the Parliament to support our proposal to remove Part 3 of the Qantas Sale Act as quickly as possible. We are committed to level the playing field. We are committed to ensure that Australians can benefit from two strong airlines competing with each other, delivering improvements in services at the lowest possible cost. That is what a strong, robust competition delivers in the public interest.
Is the coalition essentially forcing Qantas through this repeal of the legislation, or part of the legislation, to split in two, to split its international arms with its domestic operations?
I mean, business decisions, commercial decisions are a matter for Qantas. What the Australian government is focused on is to ensure that there is a level playing field in the aviation industry, that Qantas is able to compete on a fair basis with other players in the market.
But would you accept that those changes that you're making to legislation would force Qantas into that position, given the to keep its status as a national carrier?
Well, I mean, that is ultimately a matter for Qantas. Right now,
Virgin... It's ultimately a matter for Qantas, but is that something that is that an outcome that you'd prefer to see happen?
Well, you can ask the question in as many different ways as often as you want. That is a matter for Qantas. The same as Virgin Australia has got to make commercial decisions, Qantas has to make commercial decisions in the context of the regulatory framework that they're operating in. And might I just add here, I was listening last night to Bill Shorten lament how this would send jobs overseas. I would encourage Bill Shorten to have a very close look at the interview that Paul Keating did with Kerry O'Brien a couple of weeks ago. When Bob Hawke and Paul Keating set out to reduce tariffs, there were people like Bill Shorten lamenting that this would send jobs overseas, when of course it strengthened the economy, it created new jobs in Australia, and of course it was a policy at the time which was supported by the coalition. Bill Shorten is going for the lazy populist attack instead of reflecting on what is in the best medium to long-term interests of Australia.
Most analysts would say the biggest problem in terms of losing money for Qantas and Virgin are these capacity wars, that this has benefited the consumer but hurt them too much. Has the government at any stage had discussions with Qantas about that strategy and winding it back and perhaps giving more assistance if that does happen?
The Australian government is not the board of Qantas. Judgments about commercial strategy, judgments on how best to compete in the Australian market and indeed in the international market are judgments for the Qantas board and the Qantas management to make. We're not going to second guess the judgments that Qantas make, but what we have decided last night is to ensure as much as possible that there is a level playing field for Qantas to compete on. Ultimately, competition delivers benefits for the travelling public across Australia through better services and lower costs.
But I'm not saying did you dictate what to do, but these would have been presumably in-depth discussions, how best to help Qantas. There would have been a lot of things gone into. Was that strategy discussed between the government?
Well, and the best way to help Qantas, after a lengthy discussion in Cabinet yesterday, in our judgment, the best way to help Qantas is to remove the restrictions that are currently hampering their capacity to freely compete in the aviation market. And of course, beyond that, we've made it very clear that the Labor Party could help Qantas and Virgin and others and businesses right across Australia by taking the burden of the carbon tax off their shoulder.
I mean, but you've said we're not having anything to do with the Qantas business model or decisions. Joe Hockey said they needed to get their house in order. That must mean some sort of direction. And was that within the house in order, or is that to do with the strategy, that 65% market share that's so set on?
And indeed, and the Treasurer and I are saying the exact same thing. It is a matter for Qantas to get their house in order. It is a matter for Qantas to make these judgments. The Australian government is about setting the conditions, setting the framework, making sure that Qantas has the opportunity to compete on a level playing field, because that is the best way to help Qantas secure Australian jobs now into the future, by making sure that they are as competitive as possible.
But what does get the house in order mean then?
Well, again, I mean, these are the sorts of judgments that Qantas has made for many years before, and that Qantas will continue to make.
No, but this is what you're telling Qantas to do.
And it is a matter for Qantas to decide.
Yeah, but
Leave it there.
You were telling Qantas
Thank you.
to do.